I'm so fucking afraid to use that shit. Why are you spraying people? They're just hurting there. Why don't you become a real man?
So breaking news, Antifa have begun protesting again up in Oregon, although in total fairness, I'm not sure that's an accurate statement because I don't think Antifa ever actually stopped protesting in Oregon. Rumor has it that the same people from 2020 are still there protesting George Floyd to this very day, right? They just never left. You know, Antifa is basically like the West Coast version of Waffle House, 24 hours, 7 days a week, rain or shine, they never close. And that is the same case here. Because no matter what changes in the world, no matter what the weather is, the one constant always remains true. Waffle House and the fact that these people will never find a job, never get off drugs, and never actually do anything productive or useful in their entire lives. And this has to be kind of a deja vu shocker moment for some of you because you probably remember a lot of those headlines of Andy No and everything going on in 2018 and 2019. And you're looking now like, wait a minute, these people are still here, right? It's like the guy at your high school reunion who never left his hometown and is still living off the fact he was like the quarterback or something on the football team to this day. You come back to the 25-year reunion or whatever, and everyone has gray hair, everyone has kids and families, everyone's all grown up, and it's like this guy, he never left the town. He hasn't changed, he hasn't matured one single bit. That's Antifa in Portland and Oregon, ladies and gentlemen. But all kidding aside here, I think we also have to ask a genuine question as to how is this allowed to still exist, right? Because even these particular ICE riots we're about to talk about, because that's a new thing right now, they're trying to cause problems outside of ICE detention facilities. This very trend has been going on for several months. And yet not only do law enforcement do nothing about it, guys, it's this crazy. They are apparently not even responding to 911 calls about the situation. So you want the definitive answer. It's because, of course, these people are being protected by the local mayors and governors of those states. Now, I've long been trying to make the argument to all of you that there is a strong bond and connection between the Democrat Party and Antifa. I don't care if Antifa identify themselves as radical revolutionary communists and the Democrats is like a neoliberal pro-democracy party or something. At the end of the day, they are using each other. They're basically coddling one another. There's a reason why, for instance, when national Democrats are asked if you condemn Antifa, they're like, Antifa, what's that? Antifa's just an idea, right? But it's very direct up in the Northwest, and this should be a warning to everyone. No, these people are just blanketly and nakedly just admitting, hey, Antifa, yes, indeed, you guys are in charge of the city. We're proud about that. We're going to go on camera essentially and say that. And this is the situation. Although apparently now that President Trump is talking about designating Antifa as a terror organization, that may not last so long because if Oregon law enforcement do not want to do their jobs, apparently just earlier last night, we did indeed see federal police step in and do that, apparently arresting Antifa outside of this facility in Eugene just hours after they showed up and tried to block the situation. And here we go, right? It's FAFO season for the perpetrators of domestic terror and all that. And so we'll tell you all about the situation in Oregon, guys, in today's video. So with that said, guys, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. We greatly appreciate the support as we cover West Coast Waffle House. And that said, this was the headline just yesterday evening out of Eugene, Oregon. I believe that is exactly where the University of Oregon is, showing that Antifa had surrounded the federal building in Eugene, and they were posted up at entrances and exits, pounding on doors and windows, and the employees were forced to basically find alternative exits because these people were just there, they're making chaos, they're causing problems, and of course, they would not leave.
Here with your iPhone.
How are you gonna lie here? This isn't Portland. How do you feel about that? Look out!
Yeah, so there you, of course, saw the mostly peaceful protesters banging violently on doors, blocking people from coming to work, causing a bunch of problems. And keep in mind, this was just the beginning because, as you can tell, daylight is still out, right? Antifa are basically like werewolves. So the later it gets into the night, especially if it's a full moon, that's when the most violence comes out. You know, that's when they start lighting fires and beating sticks and all this stuff, right? But I want you to also notice what you saw at the end of that video there, which is, you notice she was filming. I believe this is from Katie Davis Court. I'm not sure if she filmed it personally herself, but they start like chasing her off, right? This is a recurring theme, by the way, with Antifa, who claim, you know, Democrats claim these are just completely normal citizens who want to speak up, peaceful protesters and all that. But they clearly know that's not the case. That's why, if you ever film Antifa in public, they get so mad at you for doing so. Now, notice they're taking pictures back. Essentially, the goal there is to identify the reporter, send to like Discord chats and left-wing Telegram groups and all this stuff. And basically that way, the Antifa networks can get to the bottom, right? Dox this person, figure out who they really are, and then use that to intimidate and threaten them. Like, this is an organized thing. You can tell like exactly like they understand all of that. And so the reason I mentioned that last part about, you know, trying to drive away the journalists and the camera and knowing how to do that and, you know, hey, let's send pictures to people, is to address this argument that like, oh, Antifa, you cannot designate them a terrorist organization because they're not an organization. Antifa is just an idea, right? And it's like, no, even if the organization itself is somewhat decentralized, that's fine. Don't tell me there's no coordination at all, right? Oh, these are all just random people who showed up. No, obviously they're communicating with each other. Obviously, a lot of them probably know each other. They're part of the same groups, networks, and stuff like that. There's a reason why they all wear the same black bloc. Okay, there's a reason why they have identifiable flags and symbols and stuff, because it is indeed a group, and it's not a very peaceful one at that, right? Normal peaceful protesters don't get mad when you film them. In fact, most of them like it because they're like, hey, put this on camera. Antifa doesn't want you to see. What's up with that? What's up with that? You know why? Because they're violent criminals. That's the exact reason why. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now, that said, I want to point out to you, before we show you the satisfying end to the situation in Eugene, that as I alluded to in the beginning, this is a massive problem in the entire state of Oregon because apparently, remember those ICE riots back in Los Angeles in June? So it was less talked about, but at the same time, these same riots broke out in the city of Portland, and they actually just never stopped. like, you know, no one's talking, but they just going on every single night. It's just a normal reality of life living up there right next to the Waffle House. And apparently the reason this is because, as I was saying, Portland police continue to shamefully allow the ICE headquarters to be attacked violently every single night by the rioters. And this is all thanks to Mayor Keith Wilson, who's proudly admitting this is the case, right? Law enforcement will not respond to any rioting taking place outside of this building. Essentially, that's beyond sanctuary city policy. That is just like total abdication of enforcing basic laws, even on like your own citizens. So take a listen.
Anti-ICE protesters in Portland, Oregon, rolling out a guillotine, clashing with police and turning the streets into a battlefield outside a migrant detention facility there. It's the latest flashpoint in protests that has stretched nearly 3 months now. A Democrat mayor, Keith Wilson, stands firm on keeping Portland a migrant sanctuary city. Our correspondent Dan Springer has that story for us. So Dan, are we expecting more unrest?
Every night it happens, Sandra, and you know, this is happening just outside of an ICE facility with hundreds of Portland residents living in apartments right across the street, and Portland police will not engage out of some fear that it will be perceived as helping ICE in violation of the sanctuary law. And what makes this even more frustrating for residents is that Portland police won't respond to noise complaints or even when assaults are witnessed.
I'm calling about the protesters. They cornered 2 women out here. They need help. They cornered them. Please send a cop.
Portland police have not made a single arrest since June 18th, despite a number of assaults. A protester hit one resident with a megaphone, then a fist. Despite the injuries, no arrest. One resident sued the city to force cops to enforce the laws, And this was uncovered during discovery. One officer telling another on the police radio, quote, "If it were not ICE, we could assist directly."
This is a full-on abdication of police duty in a 4-block radius that impacts some of the most vulnerable Oregonians that we have. Now they've said, meh, we're just going to let violent rioters do this for 80 straight nights, and we don't care.
Police in Portland declined an interview, but said in a statement, quote, "We take these concerns seriously. At the same time, we are committed to protecting individuals' rights to express themselves peacefully." Now, all of this is on top of 3 straight months of protests in 2020.
So peaceful, by the way.
And this rioting has really taken a toll on the city's reputation. There are so many vacancies in the city of Portland right now that it ranks next to last in good places to invest in the country. And they've lost the top 20 buildings for offices have lost 57% of their combined value in the last 5 years. $1.7 billion down the drain.
So, you know, that whole thing was insane from start to finish. It's hard to believe this is actually real and it's happening in America. This sounds like something that would be a Canadian or Australian or UK news story that we'd say, haha, that's why we live in America. America's the best. But no, this is America, okay? And I want you to not lose sight of some of those details. So first of all, the police will not respond to noise complaints or even assaults. In other words, they won't do their job as police. They won't enforce basic law, which, as you can see, is also in like a residential neighborhood with apartment buildings and where people actually live. And the justification, guys, the reason why they said that, if you noticed, is because the Democrat mayor is really scared of looking like that the city is helping or aiding Trump in any single way. In other words, who's really in charge of the city? Is it the Democrat politicians or is it the Antifa? Well, I think you know the answer there, right? And it's so bad. You have people who are living there saying, hey, please go to bed, please do something. The police are just like, no, right? Imagine that in the United States of America, it is so bad that someone had to try to sue. They had to launch a lawsuit in order to get the police to start enforcing the law and doing their job, not to stop, to start doing that. Please, judge, force the police to respond to crimes. This is the United States, okay? And I want everyone to understand something very fundamental about this. And that's that this is the future that Democrats want for America. And I know that sounds like common sense, right? Really, Vince, you're telling me that Democrats suck for the first time? But no, I mean that on a deeper level. Because let me put it this way. I think, frankly, a lot of right-wingers have this kind of cartoonish fantasy of what would happen if Democrats attained total control in America, right? We think overnight it would turn into communist China or Soviet Russia, and then the patriots would wake up and there would be this big 1776 uprising, and it'd be this glorious thing. The founding fathers are looking down on us while it all, plays out in this stuff. But in reality, I don't think that's what the Democrat Party is actually after. They're not, at least in the short term. Sure, in the end, I think it gets to that point. But in the short term right now, Democrats are not pursuing traditional government tyranny. They're pursuing a different form, which is Anarcho-tyranny. What's the difference there? Well, let me put it this way. You can either send state Soviet secret police out there to terrorize the civilian population and do your dirty work, do your enforcement for you. Or you can have a group of private citizens who are kind of like your angry revolutionaries, but you don't have to directly claim belong to you, go out and do that. And to me, this is apparent in almost every single social policy of the Democrat Party, whether it's the stuff on crime. Oh, let's just keep allowing criminals who keep committing crimes out into the streets so they can terrorize people over and over again, right? Irina Zarutska, by the way, prime example, prime victim of anarcho-tyranny imposed by the Democrat Party. Or whether it's this relationship with Antifa that I constantly talk about. There's a reason why I always bring this up. And that's that, sure, Antifa and the official DNC are not directly affiliated. And formally speaking, they're actually different groups. Antifa's like revolutionary communists. The DNC is like a pro-liberal democracy, neoliberal institution. But why are they always running cover for each other? Why does the Democrat establishment just claim, oh, Antifa doesn't exist? They're just peacefully protesting, always making the excuses? Because they enable them to basically go out and do that on their behalf. And here's why they do it. Let me explain this. Sure. You could take power And you could send out your state secret police to go to every single door and ask people, hey, are you a Trump supporter? We're going to look for evidence. If it is, we're confiscating all your guns and we're throwing you in the gulags. Sure. But at the moment that happens, people are all going to know they no longer live in a free society, right? There's no illusion of it. Hey, we live in a dictatorship, essentially. What's much more pragmatic and easier to kind of keep under the wraps and just slowly push forward is to stand there in front of the camera while you're enabling this anarcho-tyranny, right? While this violent mob is running around enforcing your will, and that's a result of your own policies that enable those very people, right? All this political violence, social violence, all these things. But you can stand there and say, what do you mean? You live in a free country. You live in a liberal democracy. Are the police showing up to your house, arresting you for your beliefs? No. I mean, those crazy terrorists that we keep letting out of jail might be doing that, but hey, we have nothing to do with them, right? Understand that? And this is also, I would even argue, true on a Democrat policy like gun control, because I've been thinking about this a lot ever since the Charlie Kirk assassination, where you saw so many liberals go out and say, we need gun control, despite the fact that Tyler Robinson used a World War I era Mauser bolt-action rifle that was a family heirloom, right? There was no way gun control could have stopped it, but they said it anyway. But of course, we know what that's really about. First of all, we know what gun control itself is really about, which is it never actually disarms the criminals or the people, the left wants to have the guns, we'll say. It only disarms the normal Americans. Now, traditionally, in American conservative thought, people believe the real reason Democrats want gun control is so that way the state, right, the secret police can run around and confiscate basically your guns, and then they can enact tyranny on you. But I would argue, based on the contradiction of the policy, right, it's like, oh, we want to allow all the criminals out of jail, but we also want gun control. Like, we want to be strict on violence, but also loose on violence. Again, points much more towards this anarcho-tyranny thing that they truly want. Which is, no, the real reason they want to disarm the normal citizens is not because they're going to go to your door and inflict violence. It's so that way it's easier for quote-unquote left-wing activists, and yes, I'm including the violent criminals they allow out of jail to do their social bidding, because I'd argue those types of people are also left-wing activists, to essentially inflict violence upon normal American citizens, right? And again, that's much easier, and you look much better, you sleep better at night if you're a Democrat, knowing that, oh, well, I had nothing to do with that. They'll go out after this stuff. They'll vaguely condemn violence. They'll pretend they were not involved in it, as I put here. They get to look like peaceful believers in liberal democracy while they quietly enable the communist mob. That is what they want, right? So that's why I say, ultimately, you want any example of what like future Democrat policies will look like. It's very unique, frankly, right? Don't look to the Soviet Union. Don't look to Cuba or any of these places. Just look to Portland, Oregon. That's the life they want to impose, frankly, on everyone else. And what I think is especially nefarious about this kind of system is that at least traditional authoritarianism is honest with you, right? Under a normal historical authoritarian government, you're not under any illusion as to, first of all, who's really in charge. Now, one could argue the rule of law is not great in those types of societies, sure. But generally speaking, you kind of have an idea of what the rules are. And most importantly, you're under no illusion that you're free. Like, people understand when they live in a dictatorship or, hey, an absolute monarchy, like that person's in charge, I have to listen to them. But in an anarcho-tyranny, none of those things are true. You don't really know who's in charge. You don't really know what the rules are. And you don't really know what you have to do to actually stay safer within people's safety, because it's anarchy. It's all over the place. And hey, you do anything that might piss off a criminal, or you're just running the wrong path of a criminal, you might be the victim of that. But also, if you defend yourself, the state might throw you in jail. So are the criminals running the show? Is the state running the show? No one knows. It's completely and utterly a terrible situation to live under, truly. And I think the reason why this is so important to understand is also because I've heard a lot of these slippery slope arguments, for instance, in regards to like Trump being tougher on crime, right? Hey, he's federalizing DC. That's an overreach. Hey, he's talking about sending National Guard to other cities. I mean, do we want this? That's martial law. And like, even if, the right wing does this, maybe the left wing will do this back, right? We're going to be under Joe Biden's future secret police or something like that. But again, understand, no. The Democrat agenda is not that form of tyranny. It's not directly martial law. It's anarcho-tyranny, right? So by crushing anarcho-tyranny in this country, which means, for instance, designating Antifa a terrorist organization, which means, for instance, going into Democrat cities and saying no longer will these criminals run the show on the behalf of the Democrat Party, that's not enabling a slippery slope for the Democrats or the left in this country to like take us down. That's actually rolling up their slippery slope, right? That's actually defeating and disabling their ability to enact their true plans on this country. Because again, that's what they want. Anarcho-tyranny. When you use the government to crush the anarchists, you are crushing the end goals of the liberals and of the Democrats in this country. Very important distinction to make. Now, all of that in mind, I know I went a little tangent there, but I think that truly is a really important message for people to understand. The good news here is that hours after back to Eugene, that, you know, you had these clowns show up, federal police officers, following Trump's, talk about a foreign terror, or domestic terror, I should say, designation, made several arrests outside the federal building in Eugene. And Antifa and far left extremists, of course, were attempting to siege the building, which is something we've seen, again, for many years now. But check it out. I'm glad to see this because you have to stop the situation before it gets out of control. Anyone remember, for instance, those videos from 2020 of when Antifa in Portland were trying to siege the federal courthouse, and eventually it turned into basically medieval warfare where they're using street barricades as shields, like literally like running like Romans essentially. It's just like a ridiculous situation. But why did that happen is because you allowed the situation to get out of hand. And eventually, I think if I remember back then, by the way, like Trump deployed more feds to Portland, and it was considered a controversial decision back then, because how dare you shut down mostly peaceful, quote unquote, protesting. But the feds here are saying no in the span of hours. Like that very night, they show up and they're like, no, this is not going to be tolerated. It's not going to happen. Do not even try it. And frankly, I think you have to figure out the maximum possible way to make an example out of these left-wing terrorists, especially considering the new designation here being given to Antifa. This is what President Trump said earlier today, quote, "I have been briefed on the deadly shooting at the ICE field office in Dallas, Texas. It has now been revealed that the deranged shooter wrote anti-ICE on his shell casings. This is despicable. The brave men and women of ICE are just trying to do their jobs and remove the worst of the worst criminals out of our country, but they are facing an unprecedented increase in threats, violence, and attacks by deranged radical leftists. This violence is the result of the radical left Democrats constantly demonizing law enforcement, calling for ICE to be demolished, and comparing ICE officers to Nazis." Yes, that is absolutely correct, by the way. The Democrats incite the stochastic terrorism, and then the radical left, their friends, right? Their little buddies here, their paramilitary organization, as we keep on describing, goes out and then just commits that and does and acts upon that. So that's exactly what is going on here. The continuing violence from radical left terrorists in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination must be stopped. ICE officers and other brave members of law enforcement are under grave threat. We have already declared Antifa a terrorist organization, and I will be signing an executive order this week to dismantle these domestic terrorism networks. I am calling on all Democrats to stop this rhetoric against ICE and America's law enforcement right now. The Trump administration is fully committed to backing law enforcement, strong borders, securing our homeland, deporting violent illegal criminals, and fully rooting out the left-wing domestic terrorism that is terrorizing our country. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And that said, I think two things are going to be really important here to make sure that, you can truly treat Antifa as domestic terrorists. Because I did some research essentially on the existing law in terms of foreign terrorist organizations, which probably don't apply to Antifa, although there are some interesting stories about the way they're funded and all that. But specifically on the front of domestic terrorism, I think what you have to do is anytime you arrest Antifa for, say rioting or trying to commit an attack or something, first of all, don't just charge that with assault or disorderly conduct, right? You have to throw some type of extreme charges on that, right? Attempts to incite or commit terrorism based on, for instance, that designation. After all, by the way, the U.S. federal government, as you can see right here, defines domestic terrorism in general as, quote, activities that involve acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state, appear to be intended, are designed to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping, and occur primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. So, needless to say, this definition can be applied to people who are, for instance, committing violent riots. It just rarely is, because we're just like, oh, disorderly conduct, disturbance of the peace instead. That's why I say, if you're going to make this designation, you have to make sure that these people, first of all, are taken into federal custody, because you know that the states aren't going to do anything, especially these blue states. And then secondly, you slap them with those charges. And then thirdly, I would argue, right, the real way you break up the group is you have to bring RICO charges against whatever's going on here, which I'm sure there's a, deep web, a deep network and all of that. Right. And if you're able to get that done, if these people are kept in custody and you throw the book at them, that's how you really, first of all, break down on the violence. And then secondly, to break up the organization, do something like RICO, figure out what laws they're committing financially, which is probably several laws they're breaking, I should say, and then do it that way. But anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.